Today we're going to make a Russian sauerkraut. Typical sauerkraut recipe, very easy, not spicy, just plain simple. We'll need salt, cabbage, some carrots for color. Sometimes I use regular pumpkin or butternut squash or crooked pumpkin and use this part. It's just for the color. I'm not using any vinegar, I don't use any preservatives, it's just the fermentation process from the actual cabbage. I took 2 pieces of cabbage. I did this on purpose to show you that sometimes people kind of think like, oh, it's a bad piece of cabbage, but if you look closely, it was already cut once in the store. So your way to choose the cabbage, it has to be really firm, not fluffy, and it doesn't matter whether it's green or white, more round or more flat, but you will have to peel these dirty leaves and cut this part out like they do in grocery stores. Basically clean the cabbage before you really slice it. Now we're going to talk about how to cut and the tools with which we're going to cut the cabbage. You can use a regular knife and a food grater. I have a different settings over here. My favorite one is this one because it gives the big pieces but not huge pieces like this, and would be way too fine. Or you can use something like this. It's a V slicer. You have 2 settings, thick or thin. I like thin slicing, and in this case for carrots you will have to use food grater as well. Or you can use an electrical cutter. I have here, don't want to say the brand, otherwise it sounds like advertising, but basically it's a ball and you put a different attachment to it. For example, for carrots you attach a stem to the actual blade and it spins and you cut the carrots. Or you slice cabbage and it has different thickness, thick, thin, and very, very thick. So whichever way you prefer, that's the way it's going to work for you. Let's start. Once we clean the cabbage, we cut the cabbage in 4 pieces. And I'll tell you why. Because I like my cabbage thinly sliced and I like them to have long, thin pieces like that. Well, this is actually a little bit too thick, but I like small, thin pieces because once we pickle it, it's going to be soft and not as coarse as it is right now, and it's easy to put it on a plate. You can decorate it better, you can just stack it up, and it's really nice when it's long pieces. If you're using food processor, you probably will need to cut one more time like this because in the food processor it won't fit. And again, if you're using food processor, if you fit it this way, you'll have short pieces and it's become almost like a mush. But if you cut it this way and you try to fit it this curve, then you'll have longer slices of cabbage. Whichever way you choose to slice the cabbage, it's up to you. I'm using a food processor to cut my cabbage and I'll show you how it works. Actually, probably everybody knows already, but it's very fast. And notice again the way I put the cabbage in, and that's it. You can cut a lot of cabbage very, very fast. So we cut our cabbage, and I cut, in my case, the pumpkin. I didn't cut the carrots, I cut the pumpkin. And you see, I cut it in a long ways, but at the same time it's kind of thin because it has a specific flavor, and if you really don't like the flavor of pumpkin, it's going to be a little bit a turn off. But it will be pickled with the cabbage and you won't taste the pumpkin at all. So now what we need is a pot. I use my old stainless steel pot. You cannot use cast iron and you cannot use plastic. It has to be stainless steel or maybe glass. Then I will need another pot which I will fill up with water. Over here I'll put a little plate on top of the cabbage. We fill this up with cabbage. We'll put a little plate on top of it, fill this up with water and put on top of the whole thing. So it presses it down and it creates the juice come up, and the cabbage will be pickling in its own juice. That's how we don't use any vinegar, we don't use any brine, we just use its own juice. So what we're going to do is we take a little bit of cabbage here in this pot, then we add a little bit of salt. The amount of salt to add is kind of eyeball. I cannot give you proportions. It's imagine that you're making a salad and you salt something not too salty, because if you have it too salty, it won't really be pickled well. But if you undersalt, it spoils, because the salt acts as a preservative, and if you don't have enough salt, the cabbage might spoil, not pickle. So after you mix it, then what we need to do is we need to press it hard to kind of mash it up. And this is one of the favorite parts of my kids, to smash the cabbage, because they feel like they playing with a Play-Doh or something. And after they play with the cabbage, after they do all this, it's very easy to feed them what they made themselves. See, it reduces the volume, and it's very, very shiny and has juice in it. And only then, after we pressed it down and juice it, then we sprinkle a pumpkin or a carrot. We don't smash it together, we just mix it. See, like airy, fluffy mixing, because if you add pumpkin or carrots at the beginning, you're going to have not orange and white, you're going to have like kind of yellow mush, because the pumpkins and carrots are very fragile, and if you squeeze it, it'll be very mushy. So after we mix that, you kind of press it down a little bit and you work with your next layer. And you keep going, building up until you finish the whole thing. Of course, you can take a different bowl. For example, you can mix in this bowl and then put it to the pot where you're pickling it at the very end. But I like to do it in one pot because it's just easier, less dishes to use. But if I pickle a lot of cabbage, then I use a mixing bowl to pre-mix it. And if I have all of my kids involved, then we have like a conveyor belt, because one of them is squeezing, the other one is adding, and the third one is just mixing all of it, and I'm putting everything in a pot. Pumpkin is very, very healthy, and to eat raw pumpkin, it's kind of a challenge. Not every adult would eat raw pumpkin, but after you pickle it with cabbage, it will absorb the cabbage juice, and it will taste really, really different. You won't even know that it's pumpkin, but it's very good and very healthy for you. For people who have joint pains, for people who have muscle pain, it's for stomach. It's a very nutritious. So we keep building it up, and I'll show you what we do next. After we have filled up with cabbage or pot, we need to put a plate on top of it and put the weight. I take another pot with some water. I don't have a plate that fits well. I have a lid from a different cooking pot, and I put it on top and put the pot with water on top to create weight. The reason why we need to create weight is to create this juice. See, this is not the vinegar, it's just the juice from the cabbage. That's our goal, because the cabbage will be pickling in this juice. You leave it on the countertop for 3 days. In 3 days it'll be ready, but in 1 day please check and see if you have any juice. If you don't have any juice showing, and the top layer of your cabbage is a little bit dry, it means you don't have enough pressure to create this juice. Then you need to change a different pot with water, or add more water to your heavy pot that stays on top. Do not add water over here. You're adding water into the container that sits on top of this plate, or in my case it's a flipped top from the different pot. If you salted too much when you started to salt, remember how we were doing it in little portions? Then you do first portion salted, and if you feel like it's over salted, don't salt the second portion, because what we're going to have is mixed all of it together anyway, and the juice will be distributed evenly, and it will have a nice salted pickled cabbage. So after 3 days it's ready, and then you can put it in containers. I usually use glass jars and put it in the fridge, and you can keep it up to a year in that container. And that's the easiest, the regular recipe. You can add some spices, it'll be more spicy. You can add hot sauce, you can add some dills and cilantro and garlic and onion to make it more robust. But I like this recipe because my kids will eat it, and it is a crowd pleaser. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time with more recipes and more tips.